The wrecking ball swung in a slow, brutal arc, a pendulum marking the death of an empire. It struck the top floor of the Bastone Tower with a deafening crunch of concrete and a shriek of twisted steel. Rocco Bastone stood on the opposite curb, his $1,000 suit coated in a fine layer of dust. His face, once a mask of arrogant command, was slack with disbelief. Every swing of the ball was a hammer blow to his soul. Across the street, a woman watched him. She wasn't gloating. Her expression was calm, her posture radiating a quiet, unshakable strength. In her hand, she held a thick document, the deed to the very land he stood on. He squinted, the morning sun glinting off the simple silver locket at her throat. The waitress. It had all started with the waitress. 6 months earlier, the bell above the door of the Cornerstone Diner had announced Rocco's arrival with a cheerful jingle that was entirely at odds with his presence. He and his 2 mountains of muscle, Sal and Frankie, slid into a booth, the worn vinyl groaning in protest. Ava approached, her pen and pad ready. "Morning. Coffee?" Rocco didn't look at her. He was staring at the community bulletin board, at a bright orange eviction notice pinned right in the center. His signature was a jagged scrawl at the bottom. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Yeah, black," he grunted, finally turning his gaze on her. His eyes were like chips of granite. "You live in that dump, the St. Jude?" Ava's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I do. Not for long," he chuckled, a sound like gravel turning in a cement mixer. Sal and Frankie snickered with him. "Gonna tear that whole rat trap down. Put up something beautiful. Something with class." He gestured around the diner. "Something this neighborhood desperately needs." Ava just wrote on her pad. "Anything else?" "Patience," Rocco sneered. "I'm not finished admiring my work." She brought the coffee. He took a sip and grimaced, slamming the mug down so hard that hot liquid sloshed over the rim, puddling on the table. "This is dishwater," he snarled. Then, with deliberate, theatrical slowness, he tilted the mug and poured the rest onto the checkered linoleum floor. "Oops, clean it up, sweetheart." The other patrons fell silent. The air crackled with tension. Ava looked from the puddle to his smug face. Her own expression was a blank wall. Without a word, she went to the back and returned with a mop and bucket. As she knelt to clean the mess, Rocco leaned forward. He pulled a single crumpled dollar bill from his pocket and tossed it onto the wet floor, right beside her hand. It landed with a pathetic, soggy smack. "For your trouble," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Ava's eyes locked onto the bill. Her hand, holding the mop, was white-knuckled. It was then that Rocco's gaze drifted to the silver locket she wore. "Pretty thing," he mused, reaching out a thick, sausage-like finger. "Bet it's worth more than you are." She flinched back before he could touch it, a sudden, sharp movement. The wall of her composure had cracked. Rocco laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled the small diner. He and his men stood up, their shadows falling over her. "See you at the demolition," he said, and walked out, leaving the sodden dollar bill on the floor as his monument. Ava stayed kneeling for a long moment, the smell of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant filling her lungs. She stared at the locket, her father's locket, and felt a cold, hard resolve settle in her heart. Rocco Bastone had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he was dealing with a waitress. He had no idea who she really was. That night, the small apartment Ava shared with her mother was quiet, except for the gentle hum of an oxygen machine. Clara, her mother, slept fitfully in her bed, her breathing shallow. Ava sat at the small kitchen table, her laptop open. The screen wasn't filled with job listings or social media. It was a complex web of interconnected boxes and lines, a digital map of corporate ownership. Rocco's man, Frankie, had paid for their coffees with a platinum corporate card. Ava had caught the name embossed on it for a split second. Apex Holdings. To anyone else, it was meaningless. To Ava, it was a loose thread. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. It was muscle memory from a life she had left behind. Before the diner, before her mother got sick, Ava had been a senior forensic accountant for a very quiet, very powerful government agency. Her job had been to hunt the financial ghosts of the world's worst criminals, cartel leaders, arms dealers, kleptocrats. She didn't just follow the money, she hunted it. Apex Holdings, registered in Delaware, owned by a parent company in Panama, which was in turn owned by a trust in the Cayman Islands. It took her less than 5 minutes to unravel the chain. It was a classic money laundering structure, but it was sloppy, amateurish. "You got lazy, Rocco," she whispered into the silent apartment, a ghost of her former self flickering in her eyes. She saw the digital breadcrumbs he'd left, the tiny mistakes, the arrogant assumptions that no one would ever look this closely. He was using Apex to funnel cash from his old rackets into his new, legitimate real estate venture. He was hiding in plain sight, convinced his reputation and his thugs were all the security he needed. She opened another program, one she had designed herself, and began to run a deep-level data scrape on Apex and its affiliates. It would take time, but it would pull every public filing, every news mention, every scrap of digital detritus associated with those names. Rocco Bastone thought he was a wolf circling a flock of sheep. He didn't realize one of the sheep was a shepherd with very, very sharp teeth. The harassment started 2 weeks later. First, it was small things. The hot water in the St. Jude would go out for days at a time. Then the trash pickup stopped, bags piling up in the alley, attracting rats. Rocco's men started loitering in the lobby, staring down the elderly tenants, making them afraid to leave their homes. Ava and the other residents filed complaints, but the city officials were slow to respond, their hands seemingly tied by bureaucracy. Ava knew it was Rocco's influence, his money greasing the palms of inspectors and clerks. Then came the night the power went out. Not just a flicker, but a sudden, total blackout, affecting only their building. Ava's heart leapt into her throat. She rushed to her mother's room. The oxygen machine had switched to its battery backup, its rhythmic puffing now punctuated by a frantic, high-pitched beep. The battery would only last 2 hours. "It's okay, Mom," Ava said, her voice shaking slightly as she held her mother's hand. "It's okay, I'll fix it." She spent the next hour in the building's damp, dark basement with a flashlight, her hands working deftly on the main circuit breaker. It had been deliberately tampered with, a crucial wire cleanly snipped. She managed to patch it, her hand scraped and covered in grime, restoring the power with only 30 minutes of battery life to spare. The next morning, Rocco stood outside their building, a smug look on his face. He'd heard about the power outage. He'd probably ordered it. He saw Ava watching him from her window, her face pale with exhaustion and fury. He saw the faint outline of her mother in the bed behind her. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He walked right up to the front door of the building and addressed Ava through the glass. "Your lease is terminated," he said, his voice calm and cold. "This building isn't up to code for invalids." The word was a poison dart. "It's a fire hazard, a liability. My lawyers will be delighted to explain it to a judge." He tapped the glass with a diamond ring. "You have 24 hours to be out. If you are not, my men will remove your things for you." He paused, his eyes finding the locket at her throat, visible even through the window. "And I'll make sure they start with that piece of junk." That was it. The final line. He hadn't just threatened her home. He had weaponized her mother's illness. He had threatened the last piece of her father she had left. This was no longer about a building. It was a war. And Ava was done playing defense. Rocco Bastone loved the press. He was throwing a massive conference at City Hall to announce the final approval of his Renaissance project. He'd invited every major news outlet, city council members, and the senior vice president of Sterling National Bank, the institution financing his entire operation. It was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to paint him as the city's savior, a legitimate businessman investing in the community. Ava knew he couldn't be attacked head-on. Not yet. His criminal enterprise was too insulated. But his new, legitimate world, that was fragile. That was built on perception and confidence. Her data-scraping program had borne fruit. It had flagged a pattern in Apex Holdings' stock trades. Rocco was using inside information from bribed city planners to short the stock of rival development companies just before their project bids were mysteriously rejected. It was illegal, arrogant, and fantastically profitable. More importantly, it was provable. And it had nothing to do with the St. Jude apartments, making it the perfect, unexpected flank attack. Ava compiled the evidence, trade records, timelines of the bid rejections, encrypted communications she'd managed to decrypt from a compromised server. She packaged it into a tidy, anonymous data file. She had an old contact, a bulldog of a financial journalist named Ben Carter, a man who lived to break open stories of corporate malfeasance. She sent him the file from a secure, untraceable email address with a simple subject line, Rocco Bastone's other business. The press conference was in full swing. Rocco was at the podium, basking in the flash of cameras, his voice booming as he spoke of progress and renewal. The bank VP stood just behind him, smiling benevolently. At precisely 10:15 a.m., Ben Carter's story went live. Phones began to buzz throughout the conference room. First one reporter, then another, looked down, their eyes widening. A hand shot up in the back. "Mr. Bastone, can you comment on the SEC investigation just launched into Apex Holdings for illegal insider trading and market manipulation?" Rocco's smile froze on his face. He blinked, confused. I have no idea what you're talking about." Another reporter stood up, phone in hand. "The report alleges you've made over $50 million shorting competitors based on non-public information from the City Planning Commission. Is that true?" Panic flashed in Rocco's eyes. He glanced back at the bank VP, looking for support, but the man was already pale, whispering furiously into his own phone. Without a word, the banker turned and walked briskly off the stage, disappearing through a side door. The room erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions. Rocco stood at the podium, speechless, his grand announcement turning to ash in his mouth. He had been publicly, surgically humiliated. The city council announced an immediate freeze on his zoning variance, pending a full investigation. His project was dead in the water. From her apartment window, Ava watched the breaking news report on a small television. The other tenants of the St. Jude were gathered with her, a small crowd packed into her living room. As Rocco's flustered, angry face filled the screen, a cheer went up. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a taste of it. It was hope. And for Rocco, it was a multi-million-dollar wound that showed him, for the first time, that he was bleeding. The small victory was intoxicating, but Ava knew it was temporary. A man like Rocco Bastone didn't just crawl away when wounded. He became more dangerous. He was a cornered animal now, and he would lash out. She needed the final blow, the one thing that would put him away for good. She needed to tie the laundered money from Apex Holdings directly to its source, his violent, old-school criminal rackets. That proof wouldn't be in public records. It would be on his central server, locked away in the heart of his fortress, the Bastonnet Tower. Getting in required becoming a ghost. Ava spent 3 days studying the tower's routines. She noted the shift changes for the security guards, the arrival times for the nightly cleaning crew, the precise locations of the security cameras. She bought a drab, ill-fitting uniform online and, using skills she hadn't touched in years, forged a flawless temporary ID for coastal cleaners, a company that didn't exist. The night she chose was moonless and cold. She slipped in with a group of actual cleaners, her head down, pushing a cart of supplies. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline. She was no longer an analyst behind a screen. She was an operative in the field. Her first obstacle was getting to the executive floors. The elevators required a high-level keycard. She'd identified her target earlier, a portly night guard named George, who did his rounds with predictable laziness. As he passed her in a hallway, fumbling for his keys to open a utility closet, Ava accidentally bumped her cart into him, sending a bottle of cleaning solution clattering to the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she gasped, bending down. "Watch it," he grumbled, annoyed. But in that brief, 2-second interaction, it was done. The small RF cloner in her pocket had read and copied his keycard. She waited until he was gone, then calmly walked to the elevator, swiped her newly programmed blank card, and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The elevator doors opened onto a silent, opulent world of marble floors and modern art. Rocco's office. She moved quickly, avoiding the sweeping gaze of the cameras whose blind spots she had memorized like a dance routine. The office door was locked. She pulled a set of tension wrenches and picks from her pocket. The lock clicked open in under 30 seconds. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather and cigar smoke. Her target was a reinforced server closet in the corner. As she feared, it was sealed with a biometric fingerprint scanner. Impenetrable. Failure wasn't an option. She scanned the room, her eyes darting everywhere. Rocco's personal desktop computer was on his massive mahogany desk, humming quietly in sleep mode. An idea sparked. A riskier, 2-step plan. From her cart, she retrieved a tiny device, no bigger than a thumbnail, disguised as a USB phone charger. It was a keylogger, a piece of hardware she'd built herself. She plugged it into a rear port on the computer, hidden from view. It was invisible, silent. It would record every single keystroke, including his passwords. Now all she had to do was get out, wait for him to use the computer, and then come back to retrieve it. Her exit was as clean as her entry. She was just another anonymous cleaner, leaving at the end of her shift. No one gave her a second look. 2 agonizing days later, she repeated the entire process. The infiltration felt even more dangerous the second time. She retrieved the keylogger, her fingers trembling slightly as she pocketed the tiny device. Back in the safety of her apartment, she plugged it into her laptop. A text file opened, a long, jumbled string of characters. But within the gibberish, she found it. A complex alphanumeric string, followed by the words, "Login, Arbastone," and then another, even more complex string. Password, Claudia 9958. His late mother's name and birth year, the arrogance, the sentimentality. It was always the little human details that brought men like him down. She connected to his network through a series of encrypted proxies that bounced her signal across 3 continents. She entered the credentials. Access granted. She was in. For the next 12 hours, Ava didn't move. She drank black coffee and dove into the digital guts of Rocco Bastonet's empire. And there, buried in a password-protected partition labeled Family Accounts, she found it. The master ledger, a complete record of every extortion payment, every illegal gambling debt, every cash bribe, all meticulously cross-referenced with outgoing wire transfers to the shell companies that funded Apex Holdings. It was the Rosetta Stone of his criminal career. She even found audio files, backups from a voice-activated recorder on his desk, of him personally arranging shakedowns. She downloaded everything. She had the weapon. Now she just needed the right stage to fire it. Rocco, desperate and enraged, decided to double down. The SEC investigation was a cloud, but he would turn it into a sunbeam. He would project so much power, so much legitimacy, that the allegations would seem absurd. He announced he was personally hosting the annual City Founders Charity Gala in the grand ballroom of his tower. It was a masterstroke of egotism, his last, best chance to prove he was a pillar of the community, to glad-hand the city's elite and convince them the investigation was a mere political witch hunt. His ego demanded a show of absolute, unassailable strength. Ava knew his ego would be his undoing. It was remarkably easy to get a job with the catering company working the event. Once again, she was just a waitress, invisible in a crisp white shirt and black trousers, a ghost in plain sight. Looking at her reflection in the polished steel of a service elevator, she saw the two women she had become. The unassuming server on the surface, and beneath, the cold, methodical hunter whose eyes missed nothing. The ballroom was a breathtaking cathedral of wealth, a galaxy of diamonds and forced smiles. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with towering ice sculptures and pyramids of champagne flutes. Ava moved through the glittering crowd, her tray of canapes a perfect cover. Her eyes weren't on the food, they were scanning, mapping, confirming. The AV control room at the back, the three massive projector screens behind the stage, the positions of Sal and Frankie, looking like caged bears straining at the seams of their oversized tuxedos. She saw Rocco holding court near the stage, a broad, confident smile plastered on his face. He was shaking hands with the mayor, slapping the police commissioner on the back, his voice a buttery baritone of false bonhomie. He was a king in his castle, utterly convinced he had weathered the storm. Tonight was his coronation, not his defeat. As Ava passed his circle with her tray, he stopped her, not with a word, but by simply plucking a champagne flute without looking at her. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a function, a pair of hands. He never saw her face. Her hidden ally was waiting by the service entrance. It was George, the portly night guard from whom she'd cloned the keycard. Rocco, in a fit of paranoid rage after the insider trading story broke, had summarily fired his entire night security staff, accusing them of disloyalty. George, humiliated and furious after 15 years of service, was now bussing tables for the catering company to make ends meet. Ava had found him 2 days earlier. He hadn't needed much convincing. He passed her as he collected empty plates, his eyes downcast. "He didn't just fire me," George murmured, his voice tight with a cold fury she understood perfectly. "He called me pathetic, said 15 years of my life were worthless because I couldn't stop a ghost. Now the kid in the AV booth is glued to his phone, playing some game. Main breaker for the room is in the service closet next door. A 5-second flip is all you'll need." A small, tarnished key slid from his palm into hers. The key to the closet. "Burn him down for me." As the evening wore on, the time came for Rocco's keynote address. He stepped onto the stage to a wave of enthusiastic, almost desperate applause. The city's elite needed him to be legitimate as much as he did. He tapped the microphone, the sound booming through the hall. "My friends, my partners in building a better city," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. He spoke of his love for the community, his commitment to charity, his vision for a shimmering, prosperous future built on the foundations of integrity and hard work. That was Ava's cue. She slipped into the service corridor. Just as planned, a loud crash echoed from the ballroom, followed by an angry shout. George had accidentally dropped an entire tray of glasses at the feet of a city councilman, creating a chaotic, distracting scene that drew the eyes of Sal and Frankie for a precious half-minute. It was all the cover she needed. The AV control room door was propped open. Inside, a young technician was exactly as George described, head down, thumbs flying across his phone screen, a game's tinny music faintly audible. Ava went to the closet next door, used the key, and found the breaker panel. She took a deep breath and flipped the switch for the AV room. The power cut, then she immediately flipped it back on. A frustrated yelp came from the room. "What the hell? System's rebooting!" The technician grumbled, tapping furiously at his screen. It was the window she needed. While his system was restarting, hers would already be in. She walked into the control room. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice pitched to sound flustered. "There's a short on table 12. The centerpiece lights are flickering. My manager is freaking out. He sent me to find an engineer." The kid barely looked up, distracted by his rebooting console. Yeah, fine. Tell him I'm busy." Ava didn't go to table 12. She went to a secondary input panel near the back of the room, one used for guest presentations. She plugged in her USB stick. Her own custom software bloomed on the small monitor, a simple interface for a complex override program she'd designed to hijack the entire ballroom's display system. She had less than a minute. In the ballroom, Rocco was reaching the crescendo of his speech. "It is in giving," he declared, his arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous grace, "that we truly receive the greatest reward of all." Behind him, the screens showing his smiling, benevolent face suddenly flickered. The image dissolved. For a moment there was only black, and then a single photo appeared. It was a picture of a kind-faced elderly woman standing proudly in front of a small flower shop. Below it, a name, Elena Petrov. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Rocco faltered, his smile tightening. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes widening in confusion. "A technical glitch, folks. Bear with us." Then the audio kicked in. His own voice, raw and unfiltered from the secret recordings, erupted from the state-of-the-art speakers, sharp and brutal in the opulent hall. "Tell him he pays the 15 grand by Friday, or his daughter's pretty little flower shop is going to have a fire sale. Understand?" A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The polite chatter died instantly. You could hear a diamond earring drop. Rocco's face went from tanned to a sickly, ashen grey. He stared at the screens, at the damning proof of his life's crimes laid bare. Before he could speak, the screen changed again. A photo of a city councilman. His name. And then Rocco's voice again, dripping with contempt. "The councilman's on the payroll. The zoning variance is a sure thing. Just make sure the usual donation gets to his campaign fund." The mayor and the police commissioner, who had been applauding him moments before, now looked at him with abject horror, slowly backing away as if he were a leper. The councilman in question looked like he was about to faint. Rocco spun around, his face a mask of pure fury, his eyes wild. "Shut it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at the control booth. "Shut it off now!" He waved frantically at Sal and Frankie, who began to charge through the stunned crowd, knocking over chairs and people. But Ava was already gone from the booth, the door locked behind her. And as a third and fourth audio clip of his crimes echoed through the hall, she executed the final step. With a single tap on her phone, she began live-streaming the entire feed. The ledger, the audio, the panicked, sweating face of Rocco Bastone, directly to Ben Carter's news network and 3 other national outlets. The doors to the AV room shuddered as Sal and Frankie threw their weight against them. Inside the ballroom, chaos was erupting, but before the police, alerted by Carter, could arrive, Rocco spotted her. Ava was walking calmly out of a service corridor, her work done. In the swirling panic, their eyes met. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. The waitress. He moved with a speed born of pure rage, cutting her off and backing her into a marble alcove, partially hidden by a potted palm. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot and smelling of expensive whiskey. "You!" he hissed, the word a venomous dart. "The little roach from the diner. What did you do to me? What did you do?" Ava didn't flinch. Her voice was quiet, calm, and cut through his rage like a scalpel. "I cleaned up your mess, Mr. Bastone, just like you asked me to." "I'll kill you," he snarled, his hands clenching into fists. "I'll destroy you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "You're the man who uses a corporate card from a shell company to buy coffee, leaving a digital trail a child could follow. You're the man who uses his dead mother's birthday as his master password, because you're arrogant enough to think no one would ever get that far, and sentimental enough to need the comfort. You're the man who fires a loyal guard of 15 years over a bruised ego, creating an enemy who hands me the key to this room. You're sloppy, Rocco. You're an amateur who built an empire out of fear, and you thought no one would ever be brave enough to look closely." His face contorted, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "How? How could you possibly know any of this? The server? It was impossible." Ava slowly reached into the pocket of her apron. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, clear evidence bag. Inside it was a single, crumpled, stained dollar bill. "It all started here," she said, holding it up between them. "The first day we met. You think this war started with the SEC, with my laptop? No, it started the moment you threw this at my feet." He stared at it, his mind reeling. "What is this? A joke?" "This," Ava said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the dollar you handled right after leaving your cash-counting room in the basement of this tower. My father was a chemist. He taught me that every action leaves a trace. The powder on this bill, a specific antifungal agent you use to keep your cash from molding, is a custom blend, unique to your operation. It's the exact same trace compound the feds found on the envelopes of bribe money you paid to the City Planning Commission. It was the first piece of physical evidence that tied your dirty money to your legitimate world. You handed it to me yourself, Rocco. You gave me the thread. And I just pulled. The blood drained from his face. The realization was a slow, sickening dawn. His own act of petty, condescending cruelty, his monument to his own power. It had been the seed of his utter destruction. He had not just been beaten, he had been the author of his own defeat from the very first moment. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My father gave me this locket to remember his love, she said, her fingers brushing the silver at her throat. You gave me this dollar to remember your contempt. One is my strength, the other is your ruin. Exhibit A. It was then that the grand ballroom doors burst open. They didn't open for more guests. They flew open, slammed against the walls by a tactical team of federal agents in dark blue jackets, weapons drawn. FBI, nobody move! The room froze. Rocco stood in the alcove, his body slack, his eyes locked on the crumpled dollar in the bag. He looked from it to Ava's face, to the calm, implacable strength there, and finally understood. He hadn't been fighting a waitress. He had been fighting a ghost he had created himself. 2 agents peeled him away from the wall. His knees buckled, and they had to hold him up. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the alcove. The flashbulbs of the press, who had swarmed in behind the agents, began to erupt like 100 tiny explosions, capturing his face. Pale, sweating, and utterly, irrevocably broken. They marched him out, past the horrified faces of the city's elite, his $1,000 suit now nothing more than a prisoner's uniform. Months passed. The Baston Empire, decapitated and exposed, didn't just crumble, it was systematically atomized by federal prosecutors. Assets were seized, lieutenants flipped, and the deep roots of his corruption were pulled from the city's soil, one by one. Ava didn't watch the trial. She was in a different kind of boardroom, one with fluorescent lights and cheap coffee. Across from her sat a panel from the U.S. Marshals Service. She wasn't alone. George the guard was there, and several other tenants from the St. Jude. She wasn't pleading. She was presenting. Using her forensic accounting skills, she laid out a flawless financial and social proposal. The tenants of the St. Jude and a dozen other buildings, formed into a community land trust, would purchase Rocco's seized residential properties. She presented a sustainable mortgage model, maintenance projections, and a community development plan. She wasn't a victim asking for a handout. She was a professional making an undeniable business case. They approved it unanimously, which led to this morning. The wrecking ball swung again, a final percussive blow against the tower of glass and steel. Rocco Bastone, out on bail for one last day before a sentence that would see him die in prison, watched it all, a ghost haunting the grave of his own legacy. Ava stood across the street, the deed held firmly in her hand. The other tenants were with her. Her mother, Clara, sat beside her in a wheelchair, her breathing steady and clear in the open air. She reached out and placed her hand over Ava's on the deed. "Your father would be so proud, Ava," Clara said, her voice soft but strong. "Not because you tore something down, but because of what you're about to build." Rocco's gaze finally locked with hers across the expanse of rubble and ruin. He saw her clearly now, not the meek waitress, not the insignificant insect he'd tried to crush. He saw the architect of his downfall, the woman who had turned his own arrogance against him like a judo master. His eyes fell to the silver locket at her throat, glinting in the morning sun. It seemed to mock him, a small, shining symbol of a world he could never conquer, a world of love and resilience he had fatally underestimated. He had tried to throw a woman and her sick mother into the street, and in the end, she had bought his entire world, just to tear it down and build a garden in its place. Ava felt his stare, but she didn't hold it. She turned away from the wreckage of his past and looked toward her companions, toward the empty space where something new would grow. A community center, affordable housing, a playground. She squeezed her mother's hand, the silver locket warm against her skin, a silent promise to the father who gave it to her. A promise kept.